Hey everyone, welcome to our deep dive today.
Yeah, it's gonna be a fascinating one.
We're tackling bias,
Oh yeah.
specifically in the age of tech.
It's everywhere.
It really is. And, it's something that's so relevant to our lives.
Absolutely.
Our source material today is The Digital Pa-rant by
Queer.
Dr. Savani Saravanamuthu.
I love that book.
It's a great read.
Really gets you thinking.
I think of it as this passionate rant
Yeah.
about the good and the bad and,
It's like a love-hate letter
the ugly sides of technology.
to tech.
Pretty much. Dr. Saravanamuthu's insights are actually featured on Digi-Tech Debates.
Oh, cool.
It's a segment of the blog Project Plain Talk.
I've heard of that one.
Yeah, and they're all about exploring this complex relationship we have with all things digital.
Which is basically our whole lives now.
Yeah, pretty much. Okay, so before we get lost in the digital weeds here,
Okay.
let's start with the basics.
Yeah, the foundation.
What exactly is bias?
So bias,
Yeah.
at its simplest form, is a tendency, inclination, or prejudice for or against something.
So it could be good or bad.
Yeah, it's not inherently negative.
So kind of like saying that I'm biased towards chocolate over vanilla ice cream.
Exactly.
It's not really a bad thing. Huh?
Exactly. Having preferences is part of being human.
Okay.
But bias becomes a problem when it leads to unfair or discriminatory outcomes.
I see.
So think about situations where someone is judged based on their gender, socioeconomic background, rather than their individual merits.
Right. So looking at the group instead of the individual person.
Exactly.
Got it.
And that's when it crosses the line.
Okay, but why should we care about this? Especially in the context of technology.
That's where things get interesting. In the age of AI and algorithms, our biases can seep into the very systems that shape our lives.
So it's not just about like individual biases,
Right.
but it's more about how those biases can be amplified
Exactly.
through technology.
Yeah. Yeah. And even institutionalized
Wow.
through technology.
That's kind of scary.
It can be.
Yeah,
So understanding bias is so crucial in today's world.
I see that.
It's about recognizing how our own thinking patterns and societal influences shape our perceptions and actions,
Okay.
especially when interacting with technology.
Got it. So let's dive a little bit deeper into types of biases that can influence our digital world.
Yeah.
The source material mentions this thing called cognitive bias.
Oh, yeah.
What's that all about?
Cognitive biases are essentially mental shortcuts our brains take to simplify information processing.
So like our brains are being efficient,
Yeah, exactly.
but they're taking shortcuts that might lead to...
To biased outcomes.
Yeah, got it.
Exactly. And, they're often helpful in everyday life, but they can also lead to systematic errors in thinking.
I see.
Have you ever noticed how we tend to seek out information that confirms our existing beliefs
Oh, yeah.
while ignoring evidence that contradicts them?
All the time, especially on social media.
Yeah, that's a perfect example.
Well, it's so easy to get caught in those, like,
Oh, yeah.
filter bubbles.
Filter bubbles and echo chambers.
Where we're only seeing stuff that reinforces our own perspective.
It makes it harder to engage in critical thinking and consider different perspectives.
Totally.
So how do we break free from these cognitive biases when they're so ingrained?
Right, like how do we stop it?
Well, awareness is the first step.
Okay.
By understanding how these biases operate, we can start to identify them in ourselves and in the systems around us.
Okay.
And once we're aware of our biases, we can take steps to mitigate their impact.
But it sounds like a lifelong process.
It is, absolutely.
Because there's probably so many biases that we're not even aware of.
Yeah. It's a journey of continuous learning and self-reflection.
Okay.
And the more we understand about bias, the better equipped we'll be to navigate the digital world with greater awareness and critical thinking.
Awesome. Well, I'm curious to explore how these cognitive biases show up online. So the source material highlights a few, and I want to start with unconscious bias.
Okay.
Or implicit bias.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
Well, they're often used interchangeably to describe biases that operate outside of our conscious awareness.
Oh, so it's stuff we don't even realize we're doing.
Exactly.
Wow.
And these biases are shaped by our upbringing, our social experiences, and cultural influences.
And they can affect how we see things without us realizing it.
Exactly.
It's a little creepy.
It can be, especially when you consider how unconscious bias can seep into algorithms and perpetuate existing inequalities.
And we don't even know.
Exactly.
That is scary. Another fascinating cognitive bias mentioned is stereotype threat.
Oh, yeah?
What's that one?
Stereotype threat describes how people might actually underperform in situations where they're aware of negative stereotypes about their social group.
So they kind of live down to expectations
Exactly.
because of the stereotype.
Yeah, so imagine a young woman taking a math test who's constantly reminded of the stereotype that women aren't good at math.
Right.
The anxiety stemming from that stereotype might actually hinder her performance.
Yeah.
Even if she's perfectly capable.
I could see that.
And in the digital age, stereotype threat can manifest in online spaces as well.
Oh, wow.
For instance, women might be less likely to participate in online forums or gaming communities if they perceive those spaces as hostile or dominated by men.
I could see that happening.
Yeah.
So we've got confirmation bias, unconscious bias, and stereotype threat.
Yeah, those are some big ones.
Are there any others we should be aware of?
Oh, there are many.
Especially in the context of technology.
Especially in our information-saturated world.
Yeah.
Truth bias.
Okay.
It's our natural tendency to believe information until proven otherwise.
So we tend to believe things
Exactly.
until someone proves that it's not true.
Yeah, and this bias helps us navigate everyday life.
Okay.
But it can also make us vulnerable to misinformation and manipulation.
Especially online.
Especially online, where anyone can publish anything without much fact-checking or accountability.
It's hard to know what's real and what's not.
Exactly.
So that truth bias,
right,
combined with that confirmation bias where we look for information to back up our existing beliefs.
It's a dangerous cocktail.
It is.
That's where critical thinking becomes essential.
Yeah, we can't just believe everything we read online.
Exactly.
We need to figure out how to evaluate the information.
You got it.
Think about the source.
Look for evidence.
And be open to other perspectives.
Be open-minded.
Yeah. This makes me wonder about the bigger picture.
Oh.
How do these individual biases connect to, like, bigger societal issues and global challenges?
That's a great question, and it brings us to a fascinating connection that Dr. Saravanamuthu highlights in the Digital Pa-rant.
Okay.
She links understanding bias to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals.
SDGs.
Yes.
What do those have to do with bias?
Well, many of the challenges we face as a global community are rooted in bias and prejudice.
I hadn't thought of it like that.
Yeah, so for example,
Yeah.
systemic biases contribute to disparities in healthcare access, educational opportunities, and economic empowerment.
Okay.
And to effectively address climate change, we need to confront our own biases about consumption sustainability and our relationship with the natural world.
I'm starting to see the connection now.
Yeah.
So understanding our own biases isn't just about, like, personal growth.
Right.
It's about helping to create a more just and sustainable world for everybody.
Exactly. And that's why Dr. Saravanamuthu argues that recognizing our biases can actually help us achieve these global goals.
Oh.
It's about cultivating greater empathy, challenging systemic inequalities, and promoting inclusive solutions.
It's a lot to think about.
It is.
But I think it's really important stuff.
Absolutely.
So let's just take a moment to kind of recap what we've learned so far.
Sure.
We've talked about the definition of bias, the different types of biases, and how those can manifest in the digital world.
Right.
And how important it is to recognize them and mitigate their impact,
You got it.
both in our personal lives and the technology we create and use.
Exactly.
And we started to connect these individual biases to those bigger societal issues, like those UN Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah.
It's clear that understanding bias isn't just like an intellectual exercise.
Right.
It's about empowering ourselves to make better decisions in this world.
Especially in a world that's increasingly shaped by technology.
Yeah.
That's a great summary. Now I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, for me, the concept of unconscious bias is really eye-opening. It's kind of a reminder that even with the best intentions, we can still be perpetuating biases we're not even aware of.
It's true.
And that's a little unsettling.
Yeah.
But it's also a call to action.
Yeah.
Makes me want to be more mindful of my own thinking and the assumptions I make.
I agree. Unconscious bias is a powerful force. And it's something we need to actively confront.
Okay. So where do we go from here?
That's a great question.
How do we go from awareness to action?
And that is a question that we will explore further in part 2 of our deep dive.
Stay tuned.